Hey, yeah. Hello, brains. Let's talk about self-care. This episode is sponsored by Blinkist. It's an app that helps you discover and understand powerful ideas from books and podcasts in a short amount of time. The link for that is in my description. I'm kind of obsessed with it. Stick around till the end of the video to learn more about it. Self-care is something that's challenging for a lot of people with ADHD, and it's something that I talk a lot about on the channel, and I hear a lot on social media and advertisement, like encouraging self-care. So I kind of wanted to talk about like what self-care even is, because a lot of the times the people pitching us that we should take care of ourselves, the people telling us, that self-care is important, are advertisers. They're people trying to sell us things, and I want to make a bit of a differentiation. Self-care can be luxurious bubble baths and face masks and whatever. That can be a form of self-care, but it's not the only kind of self-care. Self-care can be free. You can go for a walk, and that can be a form of self-care. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to buy it, but it is something that maintains or improves our well-being. Assuming we don't have a broken foot, in which case maybe going for a walk is not a great form of self-care. Which brings me to my point of what self-care looks like is going to be different for everyone. What we need personally to maintain or improve our individual well-being is going to be different. It's going to vary. And so what somebody says is self-care might not be what we individually need to be okay ourselves. Self-care can also be hard. Self-care isn't always like treat yourself. Self-care isn't always like, oh yeah, girl, like order that extra expensive glass of champagne because you deserve it. That is not necessarily self-care. That is treating yourself. There are some ways that we can treat ourselves that are really good for our well-being. If I get a massage regularly, I know that my body and my mental state are gonna be better. Massage works really well for me. It does a lot for me. And that is a form of self-care for me. And it does cost money. But I also don't have to go do it at a hotel for like $250 for me to get those benefits, if that makes sense. And so going to a more luxurious place isn't necessarily going to improve my self-care. Spending money on something doesn't make it self-care, and spending more money on something doesn't make it more self-care, I guess is what I'm saying. Self-care doesn't always cost money. And also, self-care is not always fun. Self-care is not always easy. It's not always fun. It's not always enjoyable. Sometimes self-care looks like going to trauma therapy and then sitting in the corner crying for 2 hours because you had a lot of trauma stuff come up. And that's a form of self-care. And it's not going to be advertised in the same way as like a fancy face mask will be, but it is still self-care. Self-care for me is doing my laundry on Sundays and actually folding it and putting it away so that during the week I have clothes to wear and I know where to find them. And what we personally need for self-care can not only vary from person to person, but also depending on what else is going on in our lives or at what stage we're at in our lives. After my mom died, I needed support with grief. And then after a few months, was ready to start some trauma therapy. And that was a really good thing for me. And I was in trauma therapy for like 2 years, and that was wonderful. And it was a form of self-care. And I prioritized it. I actually told my team, like, I'm going to take Thursday afternoons to do therapy. And someone on the team suggested, and I'm very glad they did, it's trauma therapy. Like, take the couple extra hours, like, take the afternoon off. If you're going to do trauma therapy, don't try going back to work after that. And that ended up being a really good introduction to me of self-care, of going and doing this hard thing and emotional thing and difficult thing that didn't feel like a luxury at all. Like, it was not fun, but it was something that helped me maintain and improve my well-being. It helped me get better. It helped me undo a lot of, I guess, damage from my childhood. It helped me heal from a lot of things, and it was really good for me. And when my therapist's schedule changed and it wasn't going to work out for me at that time slot anymore, she offered to have me go and start with a different therapist. And I went, you know what? It's been a couple of years. Like, I'm doing really well with my mental health right now. I don't think it would be the kindest thing. I don't think it would be self-care for me right now to start with a new therapist. If I were still in a place where I was really needing that therapy every week, that might have been the case. But I realized I was doing well. And what I was going through now is I'm stressed. Like, I'm writing a book. I'm running the company. I've got a lot of things going on. We're moving to the new studio. There's a lot of things going on. And I thought, you know what? For me, what self-care looks like now is different. What self-care looks like now is going and kayaking, like going and having fun, doing things that are going to de-stress me, not things that are going to like dig up more stuff for me to process because I'm already processing so much. The tricky thing was convincing myself that like going kayaking was as important as going to therapy, right? Like therapy, I don't know, there's like a specific time slot, and that's the one time that it happens. And you know, obviously, like who on my mental health friendly team is going to be like, therapy's not important. But I was just like, but kayaking, like surely that's not important enough to like take the afternoon off. But it is. I carved out that time for me when I was not mentally well. I think carving out that same amount of time and continuing it to keep mentally well is absolutely valuable. It's absolutely valid. I think it can be hard sometimes to know what we should be doing for our self-care, because like what is even going to maintain or improve our well-being? But I think there are a few ways that like I've learned to do it. One is to check in with myself. Like, how am I doing? Listening to my body. Exercise can be a form of self-care, but if my body's hurting a lot, like maybe I need to tone it down a little bit. Going out to dinner and like having a nice meal, like great. But if my bank account is struggling right now, like maybe that's not a good form of self-care. I think it can be hard to tell what is self-care even. Like, where should we focus our energy? Because I think for those of us with ADHD, the idea of doing all of the self-care is really intimidating and daunting, and like probably not possible probably for most of us. Like me getting up in the morning and, you know, taking a shower and doing my hair and makeup and meditating every day and doing my workout every day and going to work and eating healthy and doing all of the self-care things. I don't know how people fit that into a day. I can't. But I think the key is prioritizing. I think that knowing what you need and leaning into that at least a little bit is really helpful. I've learned a few different ways to tell what kind of self-care I need and where I should be putting my time and energy and money, especially if money is tight. And that for me is listening to my body. How do I feel? Am I really, really stressed out? In which case, maybe things that are going to de-stress me. If I'm really emotional, sometimes self-care for me looks like journaling, like writing stuff out, talking to a friend, processing some stuff. Going to therapy. If you're hungry, self-care looks like going and getting food. If you're thirsty or not getting enough water, like drinking more water can be a form of self-care. So I think like letting your body kind of guide you is one way. That can be difficult because we're not always in touch with our body. Alexithymia is something that people with ADHD and autism experience, where you can't always tell like what you're feeling, but there are at least indicators or, you know, scheduling times. Like one of the things I do for food is I schedule it so that I don't wait until my body's like I'm really, really hungry, because if I wait until then, I'm probably not going to eat something super healthy. Checking in with other people, like the people around you, can be another thing of like, hey, like, how do you think I'm doing? Like, do I seem more anything to you? Do I seem more stressed? Do I seem more worried about money? Does it seem like I'm getting triggered a lot? Like, I knew that I needed to go to trauma therapy because people kept telling me, like, you're reacting to something that isn't happening right now. Like, this is a trauma trigger. I kept getting triggered by things, and that's how I knew I needed to go to trauma therapy. Working with a therapist, she was able to talk to me a lot about, like, what self-care looked like and what I might need. And she taught me to ask myself, like, is this kind to me? If I was asking myself to do something or pushing myself to do something, is this kind? And a lot of times it wasn't. I was just like, no, what does that have to do with anything? But like, that's a form of self-care too, is asking, like, is what I'm asking myself to do, is that okay for me, or is it hurting me? Like, is this kind for me? I think self-care can be so difficult for those with ADHD that it's something that it often makes sense to get help with. I did a video a long time ago, self-care checklist, like just basic human needs to run down. But I think one of the biggest things too is giving up time for self-care. There's so often that we realize that something came up or something's more urgent or somebody needs us, and we give up any time that we had planned for self-care as if it's not critical. But again, self-care is anything that maintains or improves our well-being. And we need to be well enough to be able to be there for ourselves and the people that we love. We can push ourselves temporarily, but long term, we start to break down. Like, our bodies and our mental state starts to deteriorate. We can't push ourselves at that level forever. And I think that that's a hard thing to realize. It's a hard thing to acknowledge. But sometimes, like, I don't know, the best thing that we can do for ourselves is to recognize that, like, we can't be running at 60 miles per hour constantly. Like, actually, I'm pretty impressed if anybody can run at 60 miles per hour. That's pretty fast. But like, we can't always be flooring it. We can't always be pushing ourselves to our limit and then wait for, I don't know, an Instagram ad for for a face mask to like slow down. There are other ways we can slow down. This is the last thing that I'll say about self-care. I try to, for the most part, get it out of the way in the morning, because as the day goes on, I'm more likely to be too tired to take care of myself, too busy, like work runs late or something happens, something went wrong, I've got to put out a fire, whatever. So I have a rule that like all of my self-care, for the most part, happens before I start work. So like all of my bio needs, I make sure I drink water and eat food that is healthy for me. And if I'm going to meditate, that's when I meditate. If I need to take a shower, that's when I take a shower. And then like I might get incidental self-care later on, but like for the most part, it happens in the morning, because that's before I've run out of energy. It's before life has happened and scattered all my plans to the winds. I guess what I'm saying is prioritize self-care and recognize that what self-care is not just what is sold to us. It's taking care of ourselves, and taking care of ourselves can look like rewarding ourselves or treating yourself occasionally, but it also looks like therapy. It also looks like exercise. It also looks like learning when and how to say no. It's going to vary from person to person. What one person needs might not be what another person needs. Somebody can be like, oh, but let's do this thing together because like self-care, well, that's not what I need right now. I'm a different person. My body has different needs than the next person's. My mind has different needs. My spirit has different needs. Starting to question that a little bit and challenging it and going, okay, is this self-care for me? Is this self-care right now? What do I need right now? And starting from there. So speaking of self-care, there are a lot of books like Atomic Habits and Dare to Lead that I was totally intending to read and just couldn't find time for. Until now. How? Blinkist. It's an app that offers the best selection of nonfiction books, pulls out key takeaways, and puts them into short text and audio explainers called Blinks. They're like 15 minutes long, and they're really good. You can even listen and read at the same time. I read this one because I've always wanted to be able to stop time, and ideally have a time machine. But apparently we're not there yet. I loved how the information was presented. It was easy to follow, really engaging, and I was able to remember and implement pretty much everything I learned right away. One of which was that you need to think carefully about how you're investing your time and what return you're getting on that investment. I realized I get a lot more out of going kayaking with a pal after a long week of shooting than staying home and spending the same amount of time complaining about being really tired. I also learned that you have a lot more freedom over how you spend your time than you think. Even the stuff we're obligated to do are generally obligations we agreed to. And even when you need to do something, you still have a lot of freedom in how you do it. But how do you stop time, you say? It turns out mindfulness can slow down your experience of time, which can enable you to extend it and even stop it. There's a ton more Blinks I'm looking forward to checking out. It's like it's designed for those of us with ADHD. If you'd like to try it out yourself, right now Blinkist has a special offer for the brains. Click the link in my description to start your free 7-day trial with Blinkist and get 25% off a premium membership. So those are my thoughts on self-care. It's important. It's not something that you buy necessarily, although sometimes, sure. And it looks different for everybody, and it looks different for where you're at in life. But self-care is important. And it's hard. Thank you to my brain advocates and all my Patreon brains for letting me, shower thoughts at you. I think it's an important conversation. I think maybe that's what I'm hoping to start here, is a conversation about like, what is self-care for you? And what do you do that doesn't cost any money, maybe, that is really helpful for you, for your mental or physical well-being? Let me know in the comments below what you do for self-care, what that looks like for you. Like, subscribe, click all the things, and I will see you next video. Bye, brains.